Hello, I'm Sue Stockdale, and welcome to episode 74 of Access to Inspiration podcast, the show where you can gain inspiration from people who may be unlike you. We hope their stories and insights enable you to transcend day-to-day challenges and to reflect on what you are capable of achieving. Well, for regular listeners, you may have noticed we have some new intro music. Our sound editor Matthias sourced it from Miguel and Christian, the founders of a new company, Patagonia Soundtracks, that are selling royalty-free music. So we hope that you really like it. Now, in our last episode, our guest was from Colombia, and this time we head to Northern Europe and to Finland. Thomas Luther is CEO of Nevel, a green infrastructure company, and he's passionate about leading people, their business, and their customers to a more sustainable future. Welcome to the podcast, Thomas.
Thank you, Sue. Great to meet you.
It's great to speak to you today. And I know you're from Finland, and maybe some of our listeners haven't been to Finland. I think you said there is a phrase, is it Sisu, that describes being a Finn?
So Sisu, it's S-I-S-U. So it's a word which doesn't have a direct translation, actually, but you could describe it as the Finnish way of being. It's about having guts, being humble. It's about can-do attitude, it's about trusting people, and it's about stamina. I think it's very hard to have one specific word for it, but that's a combination of it. And it's I would say, the national DNA of us Finns.
And do you think that that is related to nature in any way? Because it always strikes me that Finns are very close to nature.
Yeah, good question. It is. I think that we're very kind of close to Earth to start with, coming from the universe downwards. And it's also very close to nature. I think a typical Finn loves the nature. In a sense, you want to go to the forest. We have a lot of forest. We have not 1,000 lakes as we're told to have. We actually have, I think, 200,000 lakes.
That sounds like a lot of mosquitoes in the summer.
Oh, yeah. We hope not this summer that bad, but you do have them.
And I know that you are particularly interested in sustainability and the environment, and that's part of your job as a leader.
Yes, it is. I think something changed for, let's say, 5+ years ago. I think it started off what I do want to work with, or what I don't want to work with. I wanted to ensure that the stuff I do have an impact. And it's not something like I just decided overnight that this has to happen. It's something that came into me. I couldn't work for something which I don't believe in. I think that's something that has changed massively. In younger years, it could have been a nice leadership position, nice money, whatever. But the drivers are different in today's world. And when I work with what I do today, I remember my oldest daughter saying once that when I work with sustainability, Dad, finally do something proper and something good. So I think that was a good way to think about it. And I really do genuinely believe in purpose-driven stuff. And if I can't myself find the purpose, how can I lead? And how can I create the story? How can I make people passionate about it if I don't believe it in myself?
And what do you think was that turning point that changed your thinking into being much more purpose-driven?
One could be age, becoming more mature. One could be that I think I've passed the kind of biggest career aspirations already. Then it's not career driven. And I think it's the world around us that also makes you change when you see what's happening.
Well, there's certainly a lot of focus on the environment in the news of late.
Absolutely. And I think if you want to find purpose-driven job, I think the first thing to think about is what are the mega trends of the world. And if you're working with something which is the mega trend, then you will for sure find a purpose and you can drive your company and people through that.
Now, you're the CEO of Nevel. What does that company do?
The name comes from Next Level. So we're doing next level utility infrastructure. And what that means, we own, operate, develop towards greener, it could be heat, steam, water, infrastructure assets. So we own the assets there on our balance sheet, but with our customers, we co-develop them towards greener. So carbon-free, of course. Big thing is circular economy. So, for example, produce heat. We also see what we can do with the residuals. They can become fertilizers to the agriculture industry, for example. Where, for example, in one case, from poultry residuals, we're creating biogas and so forth. So really look at the circular economy as well as part of it. And of course, see carbon positive in the future.
So how does the company measure success? I'm imagining it's not just financial success.
Correct. ESG is actually very top on the agenda. And when I did my CEO interviews before I joined, I checked, and also the main owner and myself, we checked we are aligned on the ESG. I think that was extremely important because we're coming from an industry where we do combustion today to produce heat, and how we move forward and with what technologies was really important in that aspect.
Just to clarify for the listener that's not aware of what ESG is, tell us what that is.
So E for environmental, S for social, and G for governance. So environmental, I think in today's world, it's much more than only getting carbon neutral. I think that's what you have to already have on your agenda. It's the fundamental. And the next becomes biodiversity, circular economy inside it, and so forth, and recycling, everything that you reuse, redevelop, and all of that. The S is the social side. So I think the key things are there when you look at companies first is safety for people. And I always want to add, it's not only about physical safety, it's also about mental safety. You feel safe at work, you have good colleagues, you have respectful cultures and so forth. It's not only about physical safety in today's world. The biggest issues in the world are more psychological than physical.
That's an interesting point that you raised there around creating that psychological safety in a way within a workplace. As a leader then, Thomas, how do you set the tone for that at the top of the organisation?
You're spot on. I think it comes from a few things. First, of course, how do I behave and even how the board behaves. And then I want to always say that in the end, we are all people. People do most of the work today, and that will be the case in the future as well. And we have to respect each other. And it's not only to be a leader that respects the subordinates. In my world, 80% is positive and 20% is constructive. You have to go with the positives. Otherwise, the culture becomes very depressing, stressful. And in the end, even if you would perform, people can't take it psychologically. It becomes just too heavy.
How does that psychological safety get engendered around the boardroom table? I know these days we're probably all working virtually, but if you're having that leadership team conversation, how do you create that sense of psychological safety?
Excellent question as well. I think you have to have a kind of a leadership promises. What do you promise as a leader, as a leadership team? It could be value-based. We promise to listen, we promise to respect, and in good and bad times, not all times are good, and sometimes you need to do things which are not nice. And also in those cases, you need to respect people, and if they are not nice conversations. So I think this kind of leadership promises are very important. And then, of course, how and what kind of a culture do you set in the meetings you have within the company? Is it about following agendas? Is it about listening to people, letting everybody talk, listening to different perspectives without starting massive arguments? But also understanding it's not nicey every day. And you might come into debates and you have to get out of debates and find common understanding in the end.
I sense a degree of calmness that you're exuding even in this conversation, Thomas. Do you think that has an impact on your people as well?
Good point. I think it does. And then, funny enough, I'm said to be calm. I'm also very energetic. So I don't know how that goes together. But I think it comes from the drive, which is beyond there, but also being calm. And in leadership and leading companies, I don't believe in this kind of extremely quick actions or sudden task forces of stuff. If you don't have to, of course, if you don't run into a serious crisis. Leadership and leading a company, it's about taking a long-term perspective, understanding it takes time to get there, but on the same time having energy and keeping the drive up. I think it's an interesting mixture.
So that question of drive leads me to take us back to your early part of your career, Thomas, and when you were a young boy there in Finland thinking about life ahead. What did you aspire to be when you grew up?
I think even when we met Sue first time for 10, 12 years ago, my thinking was I want to become a CEO of a massive listed company. I was very career driven. Yeah, I think that was the case. I thought that the career is not saying that family and friends is first for me and nowadays well-being. But I think at that time it was really about being a CEO of a massive listed company. For some reason, it was a kind of performance thing, I guess.
And was that in your family? Did you have other people that you'd seen go there before you? Or where did that inspiration come from?
Yeah, I think it's slightly inherited, but also then learning from that. For example, my father, he didn't want, in the end, by the way, now when you ask that, I never thought about it. He took a career, but then he decided at some stage that he will just pause there and stay on a certain level. So he decided then to take the, family first perspective. Maybe that's something actually, which is in back of my mind as well.
So as you were then going through your career journey, what have been some of the highlights that you reflect on now that perhaps have shaped the way that you lead today?
The highlights are, I think there's a few because I always think so positive. I can find highlights in lowlights. And I think one, when I was first time CEO, that was in Finland, I think it was really that I could transform a company from being a passive, not growing, maybe not extremely professionally led, not with a happy people culture. I could transform it into a growth company, which was developing strategically. And very importantly, the safety culture got better and the people satisfaction got massively better. So I think a lot of my success stories, when I'm satisfied myself, comes not only from business success, but from people success. My way of thinking is that people spend a lot of their lives or time of their lives at work. So also my mission has to be to try to make people happy at work. I think then you do a good job. And if people are okay at work or even happy at work, then you've done a good, social job as well as a leader. That's how I look at life, not only the business results.
Sometimes our greatest learnings come from our biggest mistakes or our biggest failures, Thomas. I'm wondering if there are any of those less positive experiences that you've had that you're now able to reframe and take some important learning from.
There are, and I think some of the stuff learnings come from the fact that I've said a couple of times that when I was younger, I was overly positive and overly empathetic. So what I've learned, not going to specifics, I used to say that I have an empathy pint. It was a British pint, a big pint. And the empathy pint didn't fill up fast enough. And nowadays it's more like a schnapps glass. It's a bit bigger. It's a coffee cup. But that's my biggest learning, that empathy cup has to be smaller because then in leadership roles, you have to act faster. If you see issues, you have to react faster. And you have to understand also that it's a bit brutal to say, but not all people are genuine at work. They can be something different, but they might have different agendas at work. And maybe I was naive or too empathetic when I was younger and didn't understand those realities. So that's, I think, the biggest learning. How big is your empathy cup?
It's a lovely image you've created for us there. And with that drive, with that desire that you have or had at the outset of your career to make it to the top of lead a company, I'm wondering what are some ways that you've stepped out of your own comfort zone in order to get there? You've talked about that developing appropriate level of empathy. Are there other ways that you've pushed yourself along the way?
Yeah, I think it comes a bit to the same. Again, it was really in the past of having tough conversations with people. And I've had to run also not nice procedures in my career when we've had to let a lot of people go and stuff like that, out of my comfort zone things really. And I think the other one has been that when I was 30 plus years, I had already really big leadership positions. It wasn't out of my comfort zone, but the environment was typically so that the management team, I was way the youngest in the management team, even if I was the leader myself. So it wasn't like out of comfort zone, but it was something I really thought about. Hey, how does this person who's much older than me, much more senior, how do they see me as a leader? It wasn't that I wouldn't believe in myself. It was more to really think about the approach, how to approach that person and get the respect and the good working relationship going.
So it sounds like it's the subtlety of communication that's important in both of those examples you've given us, Thomas. Certainly, I see a lot of times people in all levels in organisations avoiding difficult conversations. How have you learned to do that? What sort of tips could you give to our listener if they were finding it hard to have difficult conversations?
It comes with the word respect a lot. Also, in those communications, when you have that, respect the other person. Try to understand their motives. Try to understand them as an individual. Do your homework. What kind of personality is it? How should they be approached? And I think it's really about that, getting individual in those, in a sense, in a good sense, individual, that you understand the person, but also understand the frame where you're working in. And you have to understand, hey, this conversation is not going to be ideal. So I think it's really the question of respect and preparation.
Growth mindset is also another characteristic that I know has been described about how you show up, Thomas. What for you is a growth mindset?
Kind of, in a sense, a downfall or a growth mindset. So it can be in between, but a very short time. Then it starts to go down, or then it starts to go up. I think it's like the word says, it's a mindset. You have to believe in growth. You have to drive growth. You have to, of course, enable growth to people. But I think being in a company where you don't have growth mindset, or you don't look to build growth mindset, it's not going to keep people motivated either. And when I say growth, if you go to a blue collar worker who works in a, factory doing a day-to-day, maybe more simple job, it's not like they're going to be, hey, we're a growth company. Yay. They don't care about net sales or profitability. But I think for them, you need to find the ways of how people perceive growth. What does it mean to them? Which things are important? And then reflect based on that. I think it's naive to think that, yes, we talk about growth and we try to address all the people in a big company in the same way. It's not going to work. When a leader is interested in growth, the blue collar is not going to be interested in the same things.
It strikes me that in the world today, there's a kind of assumption that growth is good. Is growth ever bad?
I think growth is always good as long as you understand what the will of the owners is. And as long as you define growth, what you want it to be, then I think it's good. I think it's a good question that you grow in sales, for example. You might grow within your customer position, or you might grow with your competencies in the company. You might grow strategically. I would maybe say that I think growth is needed when you talk businesses. What type of growth it is, I think that's the question, and that you have to define. Because sometimes you're in a business where it's simply best just to grow financially, the top line growth. And in some businesses where you need to do some transformation. So I think it's not necessarily only financials. I think that's the point.
And if you're enjoying this episode, you might also want to listen to other leadership insights in our back catalogue. In episode 8, I spoke to Lauren Vaitkus, who is leading the way in the cruise industry. And in episode 28, I spoke to Vinay Chandra, who's an entrepreneur from India and told us all about his relentless optimism. Go on over to accesstoinspiration.org and you can listen there or read all the transcriptions. Now back to this episode. You also mentioned a moment ago about taking a long-term view for a business success and having patience in a way that the growth does take time, or getting to your goals takes time. What's your timeline currently for the growth of the business you're in? Are you looking 20 years ahead? Is growth 3 years? What's your timescale?
I like that question. I think a company should find the right direction for the first. I talk less about strategy. I talk about direction, because the world is changing so much in today's world that I think you can't define easily a strategy 10 years ahead. This is what we're going to look like in 10 years. I think that's unrealistic. We've seen what's happened now the last few years. But what I do like instead is that you get the big picture right. You take the long-term vision. Hey, this is about what we want to look like. This about size of growth. You paint a picture and it's like a funnel. You see something quite wide and aspirational, say 10 years ahead, but then it kind of gets more narrow the closer we are today. And the actions you take today, this year, and maybe next year needs to be quite defined. But then you need to have a possibility to adapt, because the world changes, as we've seen. It's a long-term vision. Then you take a kind of future back thinking. You come back to today's world and start to think what you need to do today that you achieve kind of that future state gradually.
And with short-term actions towards a long-term vision, when there are demands or pressures from outside parties to change direction or add in additional areas, how do you keep the focus?
I think that if it's a sudden thing that happens in your surroundings, like COVID was, the war that Russia started against Ukraine, I think those are things where you need to then act fast. And even if I said in the start, I don't believe in task forces or this kind of a rapid changes, in these cases I do, then you would set up, of course, weekly meetings and this kind of war rooms, how to deal with that issue. But then if we come to the more longer term development, then I think you have to have a structure, a leadership way of working, and this kind of business rhythm, what you do every year, every month. And then you just need to get that change into that cycle.
You bring up an important point, Thomas, around the more recent behaviour of your neighbour country and the impact that that may have on Finland and where it's getting its heat and power from. Does that impact your business?
Yeah, I think it impacts more or less all Finnish businesses. Finland is, again, taking a small story. We were, in our terms, successful in the Second World War, and we kept our independence. That was a win. But after that, we were obliged to pay to our eastern neighbor, and we started to build our industry based on that, actually. The Finnish industry started after the Second World War, and the Finnish success came actually based on the fact that we had to deliver stuff to our eastern neighbor, funny enough. And I think that sits in our DNA. We've always balanced between the relationships to Russia versus being a very Western developed country, highly digitalized, high technology, and all of that. Now it's changed. We are entering NATO, which is a big thing here. And then also what it does to the companies. We have a lot of companies who are having businesses in Russia, and a lot of companies has exited that business, left factories there, left big businesses. And I think we're now seeing this happen, unfortunately.
So leading a business can be demanding, making these decisions, being aware of what's happening globally and how that impacts your company. How do you then relax and recover? How do you take time out?
I think, again, I always seem to come with a story here, but I think something happened when I turned 40, about-ish. I think about 5+ years ago, I just realized that life is not only about work. And then I took a general guidance to myself that well-being is key. I'm not a, single sports guy that I would have a single sport or single aim. I just want to feel well. And wellness comes from friends, and it comes from family and physical and mental well-being. It's a combination. I think you can't just do one thing and say that you're happy of those. What I do is I'm lucky to have a yoga teacher as a wife and wellness teacher. So I do yoga 2-3 times a week. I'm not very agile physically, mentally, yes. But I do yoga. Then I want to also balance in that. I do boxing, mountain biking, walking, running, of course, being out on the sea, swimming, ice diving, many things. I just like to do many things. I don't have a single way. And it's more like, hey, I don't have really big routines on that. The more important thing is that I do something for myself.
And what is the work-life balance culture like in Finland?
I think it's getting better. I think also the unfortunate thing, COVID, it's helped a lot. It's more accepted, even if as a CEO, I could do whatever I want in theory. But it's also this mental acceptance has changed that, like I told you today, I'm working from distance from my boat, being a British boat. And this Monday. It's sunny outside. I will work. I will go out for lunch in the town to meet my colleagues, then back to the boat. And then I think that's an important thing, that you can adapt better in today's world.
This sounds great. Another point you just made there, Thomas, I'm curious to discuss and help our listeners learn about the reality of the impact that technology has in Finland. What are your lives like? It just seems that you're always miles ahead with technology.
Yeah. I think it's just amazing how digital Finland is. I remember I had to visit the bank half a year ago. I haven't been to the bank for 2-3 years. The reason we had to go to a bank physically was that I have 5 children, but my 2 oldest daughters, they needed to have a bank account or actually digital IDs. And for that, you have to go physically to the bank to show your face. And it felt so annoying. But then I understood it. You have to do that because actually, again, the bank codes you have in Finland, your personal bank codes, they are your digital ID today. You do everything digitally, government, taxes, applications, you name it, and you always use your bank codes and IDs. So it's a kind of your digital ID and signature. So that's the reason I had to go to this bank. So maybe it reflects the digital level of Finland. And it's really extremely digitalized.
So, given that our podcast is called Access to Inspiration, Thomas, who or what inspires you?
I think I'm inspired about good people who do good stuff. I think it's a bit a vague statement. Then I'm inspired about good leaders. Because like I said earlier, I think good leaders create also happy people in the big context. And that's important. I've never had, if somebody asks, who do you look up to or who do you admire? I don't really have those people. It could be a bunch of people in different situations, like I said.
And do you get your inspiration, your learning from reading articles, books, speaking to people? I guess, how do you source that inspiration?
Yeah, I used to read a lot, but that I had a pause on that of some reason. But what I do, I'm very networked to other CEOs and board members. And then also being an active board member in different boards and working in advisory roles. I think that gives a lot of perspective to me. Then I do listen to audiobooks. I don't have a single way. It's networking, board memberships, being a CEO, going to different courses, different seminars. So I don't have a specific dream of doing an MBA, for example, which could be great, but it's not my thing.
And just looking ahead into the future, if you were looking 10, 20 years down the line for yourself, we've talked about your business, what would be in your vision for your long term?
I know it already. So I've been always clear that I enjoy working with different companies and different people. So let's see, I stated here with Sue online. Let's see what happens in LinkedIn in 10 years' time. But my aspiration is not to work operationally anymore in maximum 10 years' time. So it's then about board memberships, advisory jobs, maybe some kind of light consultative work with different companies. I would have a base for that already, but then also enjoy working operationally still. But that's my target.
And maybe there'll be a few more advanced yoga poses that you can do by then as well.
Absolutely. And we've even had a dream with my wife to combine this kind of a growth in business and growth as people. You have to feel well to be successful.
Well, I think that's what you've given us today in this conversation, Thomas, a sense of well-being from a leadership perspective. What is the combination of financial, social, and environmental focus for a leader? And perhaps how also your country has shaped how you lead. If there was a question that you would want to leave in a listener's mind to prompt them to think about some of the things you've explored today, what would that question be?
If the listener would be a leader, we take that assumption, I would just ask a simple question and challenge. What type of leader do you want to be?
Well, there's a great question for everyone to ponder and reflect upon, even those that are not leading other people, but leading themselves.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good add-on. And I think it's a simple question, but you can put a lot of thought behind that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Thomas. It's been great speaking with you. If the listeners want to follow up, is LinkedIn the best way to find you?
That's the best way to find me, yes.
Well, I hope you enjoy your day on the boat. And it's been lovely to have a conversation with you today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sue. It's been a pleasure as always.
Well, thanks a lot to Thomas Luther for sharing his insights with us. I do think that he embodied the essence of Sisu in what he said. Remember, you can help us out by telling other people about this podcast. We are a not-for-profit venture, so we do rely on your goodwill and support to help us reach a wider audience around the world. You can find all the episodes on the website accesstoinspiration.org or on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and many other podcast platforms. Remember, you can also connect with us in between. We're on Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn. Next week, my guest is Adiyanyu Olomola from Nigeria, who will be here to explain to me what imposter syndrome is and how she overcame it. I hope you can join us then.